Wainwright. That's Mary, by the way. We're going to cover from the territorial days to the establishment of our reservation, and then the early days of the role of the railroads, and then on into modern times. So there is a whole long history of relationship with the city of Santa Fe. We're leaving out the Spanish period altogether. And, you know, there was, and of course the pueblos and so forth. So we're starting right into the territorial times. And for those of you who do not know where the Jicarilla Apache Reservation is, it's in northern New Mexico. As you can see from the map down here, in this dark little area, that is the reservation today, and there's Santa Fe. And we're right on the border of Colorado. So a lot of times we seem to be more associated with Colorado than New Mexico. And another reason for that is because we have a very close relationship with the Southern Utes and the Utes. As a matter of fact, our very own family were related to Chief O'Ray of the Utes. And so most of the time it seemed like everything was up in Colorado, and probably it's partly because of the railroads. So from the territorial days, one of the things that brought the population to New Mexico from the eastern part of the United States was on the old Santa Fe Trail. And that came right through Jicarilla Apache territory, because this was aboriginal territory of the Jicarillas. And of course, there was a lot of wars between the Jicarilla Apaches, as well as with the Comanches, and the white people who came through the Santa Fe Trail. This becomes a very famous trail because that's what practically populated New Mexico as far as the non-Hispanic population and Indian population is concerned. After the United States after New Mexico became a part of the United States under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1846. So right in this area, up near Las Vegas, there's the Cimarron cutoff, and right at that cutoff, that one takes you to Bent's Trail, Bent's Fort. The Jicarilla were in that area, and they caused a lot of havoc in that area because they didn't like the people invading their territory. And one of the most famous of those is known as the White Massacre of 1849, and that's when a wagon train was held up, and this lady and her daughter were taken by the Apaches. And right now, the oral history is that they're still members of our tribe. And as a matter of fact, my own brother-in-law, we think comes from that family. But the little girl was never recovered, so she was raised among the Jicarillas, so we think that there's that connection there. And so anyway, and then the Jicarillas went to war with the United States in 54 and 55, and of course that's not very well known, because in the history, when you hear about Apaches, you always hear about the Western Apaches, the Geronimo, those in Arizona, so you barely hear too much about the Jicarillas. But we did go to war, and we also signed a treaty with the United States, one in 1851 as well as 1855. Both of them were not ratified, so therefore they did not become part of the record. And so there's like I said, a direct connection between the Santa Fe and the Jicarilla Apaches.
The map that you have there, do you know where it comes from? The book? Because I see it says trade expansion and reorganization there below. I can't quite.
Yeah. It wasn't meant for you to be able to read it.
Yeah.
Well, we copied it from one of the books, but we have all the resources in the back.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it comes from the New Mexico Historical Atlas.
Okay.
If you're familiar with that.
Thank you. That helps.
Yes. Yeah. It's supposed to be a better map. I'm challenged when
I
it
know
comes
how
to
it is.
graphics. Okay. So after the United States took over the Southwest, and of course one of the things they did was they started they sent the Bureau of Indian Affairs representative, who was James Calhoun. He became the first superintendent of Indian Affairs, and his office was right here in Santa Fe. So he had, whatever he did overseeing the Indians of New Mexico, it was administered out of the city of Santa Fe. So there was a lot of connections. So during the entire colonial period, there was a lot of traffic between all the Indians, including the Jicarillas, coming to Santa Fe to deal with James Calhoun. As a matter of fact, one of his first jobs was to deal with the White Massacre and other incidents along near on the Lucian Maxwell land grant, which covers a huge area in northeastern New Mexico. So anyway, so the next big thing that happened that at least shows me the connection between Santa Fe and the Jicarilla Apache is the establishment of our reservation. So during the colonial period, not the colonial, territorial period, the Jicarillas, first they got their rations out of Santa Fe, and then they established some sub-agencies in Abiquiu, New Mexico, as well as Cimarron. They were the two agencies that dealt with the Utes and the Jicarilla Apaches. And so all of these settlers were coming in, taking over their lands, so they were practically displaced. So between about the 1850s to the late 1870s, the Jicarilla Apache were practically considered homeless. We were just wandering in the settlements and living in our old Aboriginal territory, but we were tossed out of there by settlers and so forth. So then a movement started as part of them trying to consolidate the Indians under the Grant's peace policy, to consolidate Indians on certain reservations. And one of the places that they tried to put, the place that they tried to move the Jicarilla Apache was to Bosque Redondo, except that they could not keep them there because they'd take some there and then they wander off and then they'd get another group. And one agent made this comment about how these Jicarillas were like a bunch of turkeys. They couldn't herd them anywhere. Anyway, so they couldn't get them consolidated enough to even take them to Bosque Redondo. Otherwise, if they were, we would have been part of that experience with the Navajos and the Mescaleros, who also got taken to Bosque Redondo. So anyway, in the meantime, the Jicarillas continued to live in their Aboriginal territory wherever the best they could. And so by 1870, the government had created about 4 Indian reservations for the Jicarilla Apache, but never got them there. One was near Tierra Amarilla, the other one was in the San Juan area, San Juan River, near the Navajo reservation, and of course Bosque Redondo. And then there was another one up near the current, near Dulce. 1880 was that last time they did that. Anyway, finally in 1880, they established them near their current reservation. However, the Apaches did not like it, but at the same time there was a movement abroad by the Senator Tiller from Colorado, who wanted to get the Jicarillas out of where they were located because they found some mining properties near Monero. And so started moving the Jicarillas out. And what they did was they decided to move them to Mescalero. And so my grandfather was part of that movement where they decided they were going to declare war on the Jicarillas, on the white people again, and we couldn't stay there. So they sent General David Stanley to the Jicarilla Reservation, and he was smart enough, him and the Ollados, who are basically the ones in there, these two. This is my great-grandfather, and that's Vigil. What's his first name? Augustine Vigil. they had General Stanley sign a paper that said that if they didn't like Mescalero, that we could come back. And so they went down to Mescalero anyway. They were taken down there. They didn't like Mescalero primarily because we were located in the worst part of the Mescalero Reservation. I don't know if you've ever been down there, but it's on the side, it's over the side, you know, I guess it's,
It's Roswell?
yeah.
No.
Yeah, once you get on, yeah, it was on that side. And so they didn't like it, so what they did was that they, you can go back to the other one. So what my grandfather and his friends did, they left Mescalero, and the army was after them. They came up anyway, and for some reason they had a really good relationship with Edmund Ross, the territorial governor. And so the agent kept telling them, well, you can't be going to the state of, well, not the state, but territorial of New Mexico, because it's the federal government you're in charge, that's in charge of you. You have a relationship with them, and you can't get any help from them. They went anyway. We talked to Governor Ross, and Governor Ross, I guess, must have been a friend of Nelson Miles. Between the two of them, they got in touch with the Governor Atkins and the commissioner, and between the two of them, between the three of them, they helped the Jicarillas come back to northern New Mexico to regain their reservation. And without the help of those very powerful men, we would still probably be down in Mescalero. We had lost the reservation up north. So with the executive order of February 11th, the President Grover Cleveland established the Jicarilla Apache Reservation, and it was mostly the northern part. There's two parts of the reservation, the northern part and the southern part. In the northern part, it was completely timbered, and there was nothing up there. Anyway, these people, these men are, we call them the founders of our reservation. So all of them have big families, and almost everybody's related somehow to these 5 men. And the reason you see, the reason you see that half of them have their traditional dress on and their suits on is that they had their pictures taken with the suits as well as their traditional dress when they went to Washington, D.C. This picture is taken at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C. Okay, so how does all this tie into the railroad, right? Okay. The railroads here, the railroad was developed here in New Mexico. It was started in 1880. The building of the Denver Rio Grande Railroad entered New Mexico in 1880 by 2 routes. One from Alamosa, Colorado, and then that one was known as the Chile line. And I was noticing as I turned here, there was a street that said Chile Line Street or something like that. Aha, I know all about that Chile Street. I never been there. And the other one comes from Antonito, Colorado, to Chama across the Commerce Pass, and that's what pertains to the Jicarillas. Right through there is that line. From Chama, it goes, there's Chama there, and that line goes to Dulce, and then from there it goes back into Colorado to Pagosa Junction and up to Silverton. So that happened in 1880. So our reservation wasn't established until 1887. But in the meantime, one of the reasons they put us that far away was because they tried to find some land for us, and the 1880 reservation was also basically in this area here. So the reason they put the agency right there was because that was the only way they could bring supplies to the Jicarilla Reservation. And so this was the agency that, the Jicarilla Agency, and then the store. As you can see, this is the store that is on the cover of our book. But anyway, so because of the railroad, that's where Dulce was created. And one of the interpretations of the word Dulce was that a long time ago, you know, the Indians, at least our people, we didn't have access to like candy. And so the only time that you could have candy was when you went to the agency to buy it. So then candy is sweet, so Dulce is, in Spanish means sweet. So they named the place Dulce. So anyway, and so that's the reason they established the agency there. And as you can see, in 1887, that place was totally remote. It was almost like a blank area. There was nothing out there. I mean, literally just, you know, all there was this Indian camps, and there was the agency building, and then the railroad came through. So that's what brought civilization, so to speak, to the Jicarillas, because they started bringing in supplies to build the agency and the rations and so forth. Okay, so by the time the Jicarilla had settled, there was also a huge interest in the timber, because the northern part of our reservation had almost something like 280,000 acres of timber, ponderosa timber. And by the time I was a young girl in the 1950s, late 1950s and early 60s, we lived in a place where it used to be timbered. And I used to wonder, because there used to be these huge stumps on the ground. And I'm wondering, what happened to it? Because there's no trees, they denuded the whole area. And a lot of that timber has not come back, so there's lots of areas that was cleared. And they were, the timber companies kind of came in wholesale to take the timber, and they built lines off of the Denver Rio Grande that went like to Alvado. And I'm putting out these names, this kind of thing, you know something about New Mexico, but in northern New Mexico, there's a railroad down towards Alvado, and they had about 3 or 4 different lines bringing out the timber. And the sadness about it is they even had a sawmill in Dulce, and as you can see, this is Dulce here, the main, this is Dulce Rock. And the main agency in the town is in this area now. And also here, but they had this timber. They were bringing in just thousands and thousands of board feet of timber. And the thing that was so sad about the whole thing was that here the government was trying to make these Indians members of the dominant society, and they were going to teach them all this stuff, and yet they wouldn't do anything to give them training in the timber industry. Because it was just like, and the people, my people were there, and you know, starving, and everything was dependent on the rations that were coming in, and to think that we could have had so much work in the timber industry, you know, I mean, what is it these guys do that the Jicarilla men couldn't have done? Although eventually some of them did get employed in the timber area, and in this time there was no schools on the reservation. So we came upon about 2 generations of people that were settled, my people that were settled on the reservation, that had no access to school. I mean, it's not like we could jump on a train and, you know, go to Silverton, go to day school or something. That wasn't permitted. So anyway, but the railroads became a vital part of our reservation economy in the very early years. And by the time I grew up, it was like a mining town. They were in and they were out, and then most of us didn't, at least the younger generations, didn't even know that they were there, because like I said, they denuded the place, and by that time we were onto a different kind of economy. So the next, as a result of the timber, again, our tribal councilmen got together and what the government was doing was they were getting the timber monies and they were putting it in an account for us, except they weren't dispersing it. I mean, they weren't giving us the benefit of the timber money. So finally, some of the councilmen got together and they decided, you know, somebody is getting money off of that timber and it ain't us. But anyway, they went looking for it and discovered that we did have some money from the timber. And so what the superintendent did was that he purchased sheep for all the families. Every family got started with, I think, like 40 head of sheep. And that was such a godsend because the whole Jicarilla Reservation is nothing but we've got grazing lands and, you know, there was some water, good water on it. And so those people started raising sheep and it turned everything around for them. And so again, the Denver Railroad was what took the sheep to market from Dulce. Everybody brought all of their sheep to Dulce, and it became a very strong part of their economy because by the time World War II came around, many of the Jicarillas were living pretty good lives. They were beginning to buy trucks and had homes and ranches, and you know, they were buying all the goods and services that they could buy. And they had a very good living. And the private sector of business was very strong on the Jicarilla Reservation up to about the 1950s. And so anyway, so by that time they also built the Jicarilla boarding school. That was built in 1903. Unfortunately, they had, it was not administered very well, and lots of children got tuberculosis and trachoma and influenza. And between about 1910 to about 1924, the student population was practically wiped out because of this disease that was brought into the school. And many of the Jicarillas, they didn't send their kids to school, like my grandmother said. They hit her out and she didn't go to school. So a lot of them sent their children to Santa Fe Indian School. So the Jicarillas, just a few of them at a time, began to start to send their children to two off-reservation boarding schools. One was the Santa Fe Indian School, which started in 1885. By that time, the United States Department of Interior, through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, had started establishing boarding schools all over the country, in Oklahoma, Oregon, all over Indian country. And the nearest one to us was the Santa Fe Indian School. But another area where the Jicarillas went to school, where my great-grandfather went to school, was Fort Lewis, in Fort Lewis, Colorado. And he went there, but there was only a handful of Jicarilla that even agreed to go off reservation. And of course, you know, many of them, when we talk about education, you know, it's not like there was 50 of us in school, you know. We were very slow in getting our education. But just one sidebar on that is that before you start feeling sorry for us, I want to let you know that there was a lot of benefits in being isolated from the rest of the population. We were able to keep our culture, our language, our ceremonies, everything without anybody interfering with us. So by the time we got into the 60s, the majority of the Jicarilla people, including myself, were still speaking our language and had gone through the puberty feasts and participated in all these ceremonies, the bear dances and so forth. And a lot of it, if you ever look at the books on Indians, one of the things you'll notice that there's almost little or no pictures of Jicarilla ceremonies, except the one that takes place in Stone Lake, which is open to the public. And most of the others, the anthropologists and linguists and so forth, had penetrated into the tribes and started gathering all the information. And we were lucky that we didn't have that problem. We had another one. which we didn't need to have if we had administered, the agency correctly. Anyway, so it wasn't until about the 40s that the Jicarilla started getting to the point where they could go into high school. And this lady here is my aunt, and she's the one that has a whole collection of photographs that we use a lot in the book, because she was one of the few people that went to school, and then she came back, and she was one of the boarding school matrons, and she could even afford a camera, and she was taking these pictures. When we were doing the book, we were asking the Jicarillas, we're saying, there's a real gap in our coverage of our history. From the 1960s, there's almost nothing, hardly anything. So we were asking the people, and everyone's the biggest excuse of, well, you know better than that. We didn't have no money to buy no cameras. And even if we had cameras, some of them couldn't get developed the film. So, but anyway, she was one of the few, so she has a very wonderful collection of Jicarilla photographs. And this picture is taken downtown here in Santa Fe in the 1940s. And the Jicarillas began coming to Santa Fe because they could afford trucks and so forth. And so many of the parents came to Santa Fe to visit their children here at the Santa Fe Union School. And I was real proud of some of these Jicarillas that came to Santa Fe, because when I was going to elementary school in Dulce, we had an assembly like this, and they brought all these, some of the high school students. They did program on the reservation for us, and they did dances, Indian dances, and they sang, and we were so happy that, there was actually something we could see that we could identify with. And of course, that was after Collier had began to start reviving Indian culture in the Southwest. And my aunt, she later on went to beauty school here in Santa Fe, and that was the first time I came to Santa Fe one time. And I was visiting her and my uncle, and my uncle said to me, he said, I need to go get some gas. So he said, you want to come with me? I said, yeah. And so we were going down Cerritos Road, and he said, I saw a station here. He said, they got really reasonable gas. He said, the gas was 21 cents a gallon. And somehow that stuck with me, because he was looking at all of the deals. Yeah. He said he wanted to get the cheapest gas he could find, and that was 21 cents. Anyway, so that was my first trip to Santa Fe. Now jumping into so that we don't leave this hanging, what happened was that in Dulce in the 1940s, they built a boarding school where they extended the grades up to 12th grade, so that the people didn't have to go to boarding school off the reservation if they didn't feel like it. So there was almost nobody going off reservation because we had our own boarding school. And that boarding school on the Indian reservation is what I attended up to about the 7th grade. So, so now jumping to the modern times, one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention is that in 1992, the Jicarilla had legislated or litigated their water rights. And I don't know if you're familiar with Indian water rights, but if you're there first, then that's yours. So we had a battery of lawyers that proved that we were there first. So the water out of the San Juan Basin through the through the Navajo River, 60,000 acre feet belonged to us. And so, but it wasn't decided until 1992 when the secretary came to Dulce and met with the council and all the people, and they signed off on the water settlement. And the reason that's important to you is because the Jicarilla then turned around and released a portion of their water to the city of Santa Fe. So it wasn't until last year that the city of Santa Fe decided they didn't want to release our water anymore. I guess they did their own water development, I don't know what they did. But anyway, so because of that, but didn't know that, so Santa Fe paid us pretty good money for our water. So that was the other connection. And then, of course, the tribes now here in the state of New Mexico, they all come to the legislature and we still deal with the state of New Mexico and the government-to-government relationship. And lots of business, of course, is conducted here in Santa Fe between the tribes. Our tribe happens to be one of them coming to the legislative sessions, and every once in a while we get something from the tribe, from the state. And the state does take care of the public education on our reservation, so that's one of the few things we have. But the amazing thing about the state of New Mexico is that because we also have oil and gas on the southern part of the reservation, we pay huge severance taxes. And so the state legislature has never given us anything comparable to what we paid in severance taxes to the state of New Mexico. So when we come here, we have our hat in hand and say, we need $200,000 for this education program. We look at us and say, okay, well, maybe. Anyway, that's my little commentary. Okay, well, you know, this is a picture of Jicarilla baskets. That's what we're named for. Jicarilla in Spanish means basket makers. So we have a good reputation for making the baskets. And the other thing too is that we've had our artists always come to Santa Fe. This is the capital of the art world, and many of them have started their careers here or participated. And that woman there, Lydia Posada, revived Jicarilla pottery. She went back to our old Aboriginal territory, part of which is up near, yeah, in that area, and because there used to be some traditional clay pots that the Jicarillas used to make. Is micaceous clay. And when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, I used to read about how these Jicarilla women used to bring their pottery to the settlements and they used to sell them. And having just come off the reservation and being a child of the 60s, I kind of really resented it. I thought to myself, did they have to sell these stupid pots? But little did I know about these pots. This micaceous clay is a special kind of clay, and it's very high resistant to heat. And so they were not like the pretty Pueblo pottery, but the settlers bought them because they were better than some of the other pottery, and that they withstood the high temperatures. And so our Jicarilla pottery was kind of like Tupperware in the northern settlements. They were buying them all the time. So anyway, Lydia had revived the pottery for the Jicarillas. And this, of course, is a modern scene still coming to Santa Fe. And this is the micaceous clay that I'm telling you about that is now being used primarily for art. And our artists are coming. I just wanted to point out to you that this little guy here is my grandson. I just had to use it. He's the next guy in the whole wide world. We had a good time in Santa Fe. Anyway, so that's basically the presentation about the Jicarilla and its relationship with the city of Santa Fe, as well as the role of the railroads in the development of our economy. So the railroads is still very important, and I'm just thinking to myself, it would be so nice if we still had the infrastructure of the railroads, you know, because it's a good energy. It's a good way to save our energy. We don't have that kind of public transportation, but in the old days, like I said, we, as Jicarillas, we could go all the way to Denver. My dad used to send his cattle to sell in Denver, and you know, and they come all the way down to Santa Fe, and that was all because of the railroads. And we didn't, many of them did not, like I said, didn't have transportation, so they just jumped on the railroad cars, you know, and go wherever they came, and then in the evening they come back. So anyway, that's my presentation, and I appreciate